Born in Caen in 1027. Died in Rouen, the 9th of September 1087. William I, or William Conqueror. Some say that his steed, in leaping across a yawning trench, burst the bowels of the rider, because his belly projected over the forepart of his saddle. Afflicted by this mishap, he gave his troops the order to fall back, and returned to Rouen, took to his bed, his disorder increasing day by day. On his physicians being called, they declared after an examination of his urine, that his death was inevitable. As the king was triumphantly urging his troops to throw fuel on the fire, he came too close to the flames, and from their heat, and the changeable autumn warmth, contracted a disease. And the trouble of his illness increased, because his horse, in leaping a trench, burst the bowels of his rider. Much disabled, he hastened back to Rouen, and as his weakness increased during the days following, he was compelled to take to his bed. His physicians, on being called after an examination of his urine, declared that death was imminent. William I lived a life of almost constant warfare. Later in life he put on a great deal of weight, and suffered from abdominal distension. By 1087, this complaint had become so marked, that it is said that Philip of France jested at his court, asking when he expected to lie in. William was enraged, and swore that at his churching, service for women after childbirth, he would come and pay a visit to the French king, with 10,000 lances instead of tapers, and all France would see the blaze. William had an illness which prevented him from any active military engagements for 3 months. When he recovered from this attack, he collected together an army, and crossed the Channel to attack Philip's domains. We have no details of this illness. As it happened so soon before his fatal illness, it might well have contributed to his death. It is, however, obvious that in spite of his great size and recent health problems, he was still able to take a very active part in all military affairs. William met the French force, and having defeated them, he advanced against the town of Montes, which he took, and brutally sacked and burned. William was born in 1027, the illegitimate son of Duke Robert of Normandy, the so-called Robert the Magnificent, by his mistress, a young woman of Falaise, certain Charlotte or Arletta. William was a relative of Edward the Confessor, since his father was first cousin to Edward. This may account for the Confessor's support of William's claim to England. It seems that William was a very attractive, active little boy, and a great favourite of his father. In his History of the Anglo-Saxons, Thomas Miller writes, "When William was only 7 years old, his father was seized with a fit of devotion, and resolved to make a pilgrimage, on foot, to Jerusalem, to obtain forgiveness for his sins. His chiefs and barons rightly argued that such a journey was not free from danger, and that if he chanced to die, they would be left without a ruler. 'By my faith,' answered the Duke, 'I will not leave you without a lord. I have a little bastard who will grow up and be a gallant man, and if it please God, I know he is my son. Receive him then as your lord, for I make him my heir, and give him from this time forth the whole duchy of Normandy.' The Norman barons did as William's father ordered and accepted his son as their ruler. As predicted, Robert did not return from his pilgrimage, and so William became Duke of Normandy at the very early age of 7. He grew into a very energetic and capable ruler, and although civil war ensued, he was victorious. He was often cruel to his enemies, and had a very quick temper, quarreling many times with his family, in particular with his eldest son, Robert. There is nothing in his history to indicate that he was obese until late in life. In fact, he appears to have been very healthy and active. An excellent horseman, he personally took part in numerous battles and engagements, including the Battle of Hastings. Why then should William become so distended and appear to be so obese? He might just have put on weight, but the condition appears to have developed in a very short time. This suggests that he was suffering from a mild intermittent intestinal obstruction. It is quite common in obese people, where the large bowel is affected by diverticulitis, an inflammatory condition in localized areas of the bowel, which may well cause symptoms of an intermittent obstruction. Cancer of the bowel is another common cause of obstruction, but here the obstruction is usually complete, and the condition is associated with loss of weight, rather than obesity. Another possibility is that he was having some difficulty in passing urine due to prostatic enlargement, which would have been associated with renal impairment and water retention, giving rise to edema and apparent increased fatness. Whatever the cause of his past illness, we know that William was riding through Mantes, which his force was destroying with fire and pillage. We are told that his horse reared in fright at a blazing timber and threw its ponderous rider against the iron of his saddle. William collapsed in violent abdominal pain, and the army had to be halted. He had received a severe injury from which he was to die. It seems to have been either to the lower abdomen or to the perineal region, the area between the legs and the buttocks. An abdominal injury could well have damaged his inflamed bowel, or diverticulitis, and resulted in a perforation of the bowel. This is what the chronicles of the time intimate when they say that the fall burst the bowels of the rider. However, such an injury would have resulted in distension, vomiting, and severe prostration before bringing death. In fact, William did take some 10 days to die after he had received the injury, but he did not display vomiting as a cardinal symptom. Perforated diverticulitis is thus a possible cause for his death, but there is a second and more likely cause. Injury to the perineum caused by the iron peck of the saddle could injure either the bladder or the urethra, which passes from the bladder through the penis. The back portion of the urethra is easily damaged by a severe blow between the legs, causing it to rupture. In the same way, a distended bladder, which might have resulted from prostatic trouble, can be ruptured by a blow. Both injuries cause the urine to be leaked into the tissues when the person tries to pass water. Usually, a small quantity of blood-stained urine is all that can be passed, and we know that the physicians who examined William's urine immediately declared death to be inevitable. They most probably saw the swelling of the leaked urine and the blood stain. This leaking of urine has severe consequences, as the tissues become necrotic and possibly even gangrenous, increasing the possibility of a severe secondary infection. Without skillful surgical repair, the condition is invariably fatal in some 10 to 20 days. The person may remain reasonably conscious until his terminal coma, and this is indeed what happened to William. Therefore, it would appear most likely that William suffered a ruptured urethra. In severe distress, he was carried in the August heat out of the stricken town of Mantes. He asked to be taken to Rouen, to the priory of Saint-Gervais west of the city, where he could receive the attention of the order with its 2 skillful physicians. They, however, could do nothing. William remained lucid and was able to attend to his affairs while becoming weaker. In increasing distress, it was obvious even to him that he was dying. Finally, he passed into terminal renal failure with resultant uremia and death. Taking so long to die, William had adequate time to think about what should be done for the Anglo-Norman state, which he had created with so much trouble. The writer Orderichus Vitalis gave a plausible account of the dying king, concerned with 2 matters: his own salvation, and the future of his 2 domains. Of himself he confessed that he had been too fond of war, and his life was stained with rivers of blood. He attempted to excuse his actions as self-defense, but admitted, "I am prey to cruel fears and anxieties when I reflect with what barbarities they were accompanied." To hope for salvation, he directed that his treasure in Rouen should be given to the churches and the poor, while he believed that the numerous monasteries he had built were erected to combat demons and sins of the flesh. The division of his lands was a more difficult proposition. His eldest son, Robert, had long been in opposition to his rule, and had even fought against him. In fact, he was in the French king's armies at the time of William's death. Robert had been granted the succession to the earldom of Normandy, and William confirmed this. His second son, Richard, having been killed in a hunting accident in 1075, William left the throne of England to his third son, Rufus. We are told that he gave his son a letter to pass to Archbishop Lanfranc to confirm his succession. Before William was dead, Rufus set off to England to claim his inheritance, and to make sure that his position was consolidated before Robert could make a claim. The fourth son, Henry, was given £5,000 in silver from the king's treasure, and he also departed to see that he got his money from the treasury in Winchester. He was far from satisfied with his inheritance, but lost no time in claiming it, and did not wait with his dying father. William was determined that his domain should not be divided. Both Rufus and Henry were able later to unify England and Normandy. William died on Thursday the 9th of September 1087. It is said that on that day he awoke to hear the bell tolling for prime at 7 a.m. He seems to have been quite rational and composed, saying on his deathbed, "I commend myself to Mary, the Holy Mother of God, my heavenly mistress, that by her blessing and intercession, I may be reconciled to her beloved Son, our Lord Jesus Christ." So saying, he died. His death was followed by a macabre scene. Those about him are said to have feared that lawless forces would immediately be released on his death, and they all departed with great haste to protect their goods. Servants began to plunder the bedchamber, taking all that they could carry: linen, furniture, arms, silver, and all vestments. They left the king's body naked on the floor. There was panic in the streets of Rouen. The Archbishop of Rouen gave orders that the king's body was to be taken to the monastery of St. Stephen in Caen, but nobody remained to prepare the body or to take it away. An obscure person, a Norman gentleman called Herluin, came to the dead king's aid and had his body taken by boat down the Seine to the outskirts of Caen. Here a host of mourners had gathered, and they took the body in procession. Unfortunately, they were interrupted by a severe fire, and the procession had to scatter to extinguish it, while the few remaining took the body into the church of St. Stephen. An assembly was now formed, which included Henry, who had recently returned from England. The Bishop of Lisieux preached a sermon. Forgiveness was asked for the dead king, and offered for any who had suffered at his hands, and the body was about to be lowered into its grave. At this point, a knight called Asselin of Caen arose, and said that the church had been built by William on land taken by force from his father, and that he forbade the burial on ground, therefore consecrated after such a happening. Consternation reigned in the church. Asselin and others were questioned, and all upheld that he had been deprived of the land by force. Henry and the bishops who were present held a hurried consultation. Asselin was to be given 60 shillings for William's grave, and promised the full price of his father's estate. He accepted the offer, and the bier was carried to the altar, before which lay a large stone coffin. The swollen state of William's body in his last months would have persisted after death. The lower part of the torso and the legs were particularly affected, and it was found that the coffin was much too small to receive the body of the king. Those who tried to force him in did so with the greatest difficulty, but to add to the horror, the body burst open and filled the church with such a stench of fearful corruption that the service was concluded with great haste. Even in death, William was beset with difficulties. His stone coffin was then enclosed in a splendid shrine built by Rufus in honor of his father. He commissioned the famous goldsmith Otto for the work, who also designed the columns of white marble on which the shrine was raised. It bore an inscription by Thomas, Archbishop of York, and was to survive undisturbed until 1552, when, on the instructions of the Pope, the tomb was opened and the body examined, after which it was reverently reinterred. It appears to have been in a very reasonable state of preservation. In 1562, the Calvinists invaded the church and rifled the tomb, scattering the remains, with the exception of one thigh bone. This single relic was preserved, and in 1642 it was reburied under a new monument, which in turn was replaced with a more elaborate structure a century later. In the Revolutionary riots of 1783, this new monument was demolished. Now, a simple stone slab with a 19th-century inscription marks his resting place. What has become of the remaining single thigh bone is not really known, but local tradition says that it lies buried beneath the present simple slab. Others think that it was destroyed in the riot of 1783. In recent times, much of Caen was destroyed in 1944, in the fighting to liberate William's Normandy. The church of Saint Etienne Abbey escaped damage, so that the single thigh bone was able to rest in peace. A thigh bone which the French authorities declared to be genuine was discovered in the old tomb and reburied under a new tomb on the 9th of September 1987. Oh yeah, you made it to the end. Give yourself a little high five. Whether you watched just this video or binge all my content, thank you for hanging out with me today. And please, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, so you never miss our next adventure. And if you're feeling extra awesome today, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, stay cute, stay motivated, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!